President Trump says he's ordered the deployment of 2 US nuclear submarines to the appropriate regions in response to threats from the former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. The men have been taunting each other after the White House this week said Russia had 10 days to agree to a ceasefire in Ukraine or face tough sanctions. Mr. Medvedev reminded President Trump that Russia possessed nuclear strike capabilities. It's not clear exactly where Mr. Trump has ordered the submarines to be deployed. He is our North America correspondent, David Willis.
America's war of words with Russia has taken an ominous turn.
Russia? I think it's disgusting what they're doing.
Without specifying whether they were nuclear-powered or nuclear-armed, Donald Trump announced he was deploying 2 submarines to what he called appropriate regions. He was responding to the words of the former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, who accused the US president of playing the ultimatum game over threats to impose fresh sanctions on Russia next week if a ceasefire in Ukraine wasn't agreed. The former president said each new ultimatum is a threat and a step towards war, not between Russia and Ukraine, but with his own country. In a post on his Truth social network, Donald Trump said he was deploying the submarines just in case these foolish and inflammatory statements are more than just that. Words are very important and can often lead to unintended consequences. I hope this will not be one of those instances. The two have met before at a summit in Asia in 2017, after which Mr. Medvedev called Donald Trump open and well-meaning. Whilst Dmitry Medvedev retains a role in Russia's National Security Council, he's not seen as the voice of the current Russian president. Pictured here with his Belarusian counterpart, Vladimir Putin was more measured in his remarks, saying that disappointments only came from excessive expectations. The US has more than a dozen submarines capable of carrying nuclear warheads, and they form part of the so-called triad of air, land and sea deterrence, the most undetectable part of America's strategic nuclear force. Donald Trump's latest deadline on Russia runs out at the end of next week. He's already said he doesn't expect fresh sanctions to change Vladimir Putin's behaviour. David Willis, BBC News.
Our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg has this analysis of Moscow's reaction to President Trump's comments.
Interestingly, there's been no reaction so far from the Kremlin, from the Foreign Ministry, from the Defense Ministry, anyone here really. I think everyone's trying to work out what on earth is going on and what, if anything, has changed in relation to where these US nuclear subs are being positioned. There has been reaction from the Moscow stock market, which has fallen sharply. Judging by the reaction in the local media here, Russians are surprised, to say the least, by President Trump's post. And I suspect that no one is more surprised than Dmitry Medvedev himself, because for more than 3 years he has been tweeting and posting some very bombastic and provocative social media posts, most of which have gone unnoticed, I have to say. But now suddenly he has been noticed and he's got under the skin of the President of the United States in a big way. Meanwhile, while all of this is going on, we think, Donald Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, to arrive in Russia, possibly to meet Vladimir Putin. And tonight, one prominent Russian news site likened Mr. Witkoff to a rabbit being pulled out of a magician's hat, the magician being Donald Trump. But I think it's a big ask for Mr. Witkoff to magically ease all the tensions that we're seeing at the moment.
Steve Rosenberg in Moscow there. Well, we can now speak to Professor Paul Moorcraft. He's a former UK Ministry of Defence analyst and author of Putin's War. Thank you for joining us on BBC News, Professor. First of all, is this simply a knee-jerk reaction by the President, or is there strategic value to this decision?
Strategic threat and an immediate sort of response, because Trump is an old man in a hurry. He's very frustrated, obviously. He hasn't solved Gaza, a problem. He hasn't got the peace agreement or treaty or ceasefire in Ukraine. He is obviously angry and frustrated with the Russians. But it is it's a part also of a policy where the Americans have sent tactical nuclear weapons to Britain. The use of tactical nuclear weapons can only be used against the Russians. That is dangerous. And now this general threat, it's very symbolic because the submarines could fire nuclear missiles. It's nuclear armed, nuclear powered, probably, almost certainly. They got about 12. They could fire these. They could fire their missiles from the Thames if they wanted to. Moving them closer to Russia is just bravado. And the problem is that Trump can play chicken with tariffs. Very difficult and dangerous to do it with nuclear weapons.
So what does this mean for the efforts to end the war in Ukraine? Do you think that this decision will make Vladimir Putin rethink whether he wants to negotiate seriously with Ukraine?
Putin's very pragmatic. The Russians know what they're doing. They are winning on the ground. I would suspect there might be a parallel with the last time that Trump started waving strategic nuclear weapons. That was against North Korea in the first stage of his presidency, 2017. And then what he did was go to meet the North Korean leadership. This might be a parallel, assuming there's method in Trump's apparent impulsive madness. He may well meet Putin, because Trump hasn't achieved anything except telling the Europeans that they're on their own. He hasn't achieved very much. So if he's standing Steve Witkoff, who's a very busy man, obviously, if the American president goes to meet Putin, perhaps there could be some sort of agreement. At the moment, Putin's sitting there quietly. Medvedev is a stalking horse for Putin. He has very little influence. He's there to be denied if necessary. He's shaking things up a bit, stirring things up. And if Trump does meet Putin, there could be a ceasefire. But the Russians are winning. They're winning on the ground. They're winning in the air. And so if I were Putin, I'd say, well, look, I'm doing well. Why should there be a ceasefire? He might do it because of the sanctions pressures, but that doesn't seem very realistic at the moment. It hasn't had much impact. So Trump is being very symbolic, but it is dangerous. We are actually possibly in a stage, initial stages of a third world war, because if you add it to daily attacks by the Russians, cyber attacks, agents working in Britain, this is not quite the Cuban Missile Crisis, but Trump is symbolically escalating the crisis. It's dangerous, but it's not the Cuban Missile Crisis yet.
Yeah, it's just going back to these submarines. There's been some discussion as to whether they're nuclear powered or nuclear armed. What's your understanding of what kind of submarines
they're all nuclear powered. Nobody uses diesel submarines anymore except the French or one or two other powers. But they are nuclear armed. We don't know that because there is a protocol. Every rule going, he is not allowed to say where the submarines are, because that's the point. They're supposed to be untraceable, although the Russians are beginning to find methods of finding out where these long-term strategic deterrents. It is the ultimate weapon, because we have 4, the French have 5. So if there's a major nuclear attack on the American mainland, these submarines can retaliate. And that's the issue, because in the old Cold War, everybody understood the vocabulary and the diplomacy of mutual assured destruction. Trump doesn't have much historical awareness. He doesn't even seem to understand that he may be overstepping the mark in this balance of terror. So these are strategic weapons. The tactical nuclear weapons can be used by, say, F-35s, which could be used like Hiroshima-type weapons. And the only use could be against the Russians. So at all levels, there is an escalation. Now, whether Trump is doing this to say to the Russians, now is the time to negotiate, but it could backfire.
Professor Paul Moorcraft, thank you for joining us on BBC News and sharing your analysis.